Sometimes I get overwhelmed by the power and the presence of the Lord and what He does in us and through us, and what He's done here at this church. And I'll get to my message here in a minute, but sometimes I just get so overwhelmed I can't help but share it. And I was this week. There's a guy that comes in the shop. I work at a body shop, and he comes in and does some side work for us. And he was there, and different times I've tried to open up and talk to him about Christ and about the church or my faith or whatever, and the door hadn't opened, and I was so overwhelmed that day just by the power of God and what He had done here that I began to share with this gentleman just different things that God was doing, and I guess in thinking as I spoke to him, it reminded me. Because I get asked this oftentimes, because I don't know if y'all know it or not, but I'm younger than most pastors, and so sometimes with my balding it doesn't show, but I am younger than most pastors, and so I get people asking me all the time. They say, "Why did you do this? Why did you choose this path for your life? Or why would you do this for the Lord?" And two things that just often come to me that I'm reminded of is, one, I didn't do anything for the Lord; He did everything for me. And it's because of that I share, and that is why I do what I did, because my life was a wreck. I thought I was on top of the world for a good long while, and everything that I had built was sinking sand. It fell off from underneath my feet. I landed flat on my face, and it's like my marriage about fell apart, my business went to pot, I lost friends, deservingly so. I ruined everything I thought I built, and when God picked me up and restored those things in my life one at a time, it's because of that I do what I do. I don't do anything for Him, but He's done everything for me. It is a privilege to get to preach the gospel. It is a privilege to get to see and be a part of people's lives being changed, and I'm so thankful for what God does and He's done in this church. This morning I was just running. I try to do attendance every Sunday, and usually I have a little bit of help. And this morning I wanted to do it myself, and I was looking at the kids' classes, and we had as many kids here as we had 3 years ago in full. We had 12 people here 3 years ago, and I say praise God. Last week we talked about community, and I'd like to extend our talk on that a little bit longer, but if you weren't here last week, just a super quick recap. God created us with community in mind, with the intention that we can grow by the help of others. There will be people more mature than us that will help us grow in our faith. Also, we can help others as we mature who are less mature than us in their faith to grow. And I just had a thought. I guess if I could sum it all up in one sentence, I would say this: relationships with Jesus are personal but not private. They're personal but not private. I have my own relationship with Christ, but it's not something that's private. I want to share it with those around me and help those around me to grow, and look for others that are further along than me to help me to grow. And so it's not a private relationship that I have. But I was thinking about the different aspects of community and what does that look like in the church. And we had talked about serving a little bit last week, but I'd like to hit a little bit harder on what it means for a Christian to serve and what God's expectations are for us as believers, to how we serve and in what ways should we serve. And I guess the first thing that came to mind is the secular world, non-Christians, they serve, and they're oftentimes, but their serving in and of itself is so hypocritical, it's worse than what they call us oftentimes. They call us hypocrites, sometimes because we are, and sometimes just because they're angry, but either way, the world in serving, the world that doesn't believe and follow after the Lord, they are hypocrites in that, because without the Lord, it's just a survival of the fittest, every man for themselves kind of an attitude. That is, that would be the worldview, and if it's the weak should be weeded out, why would I ever serve other people? And so serving is something that was designed and intended for believers. It was designed to show God and His mercy and His grace and His power and compassion that He has on people. And you see, Christianity is different than all other faiths because we don't serve to earn the favor of God. You see, there's so many faiths that say, well, if I do this and I do that, then God will accept me. I don't serve as a Christian in hopes that God will accept me. The only acceptance that I need already has been paid on the cross. And so I don't need to prove myself to Him. I'm not making a resume for heaven, I could say. I'm not trying to line up everything so that I can come and present it to God and say, God, but I know that I sinned, but look at these things that I did that were good. Will you take me? Will you accept me into your kingdom? That's not why we serve as believers. It's because of our salvation and the love and the transformation that Christ does to us and how He conforms us to the image of His Son. It's because of that we serve, not for the sake of salvation. So I just want to get that on the table before we get started. As I look at the thought and the topic of serving, and I look at what Jesus taught, Jesus is so much concerned with our motives, equally so to our actions. Amen. You see, I believe God very much desires for us to live obedient lives and do the things that He would have for us to do, but He, just as much as He wants us to do the right things, He wants us to do them for the right reason. He wants our motives to be pure, our hearts to be in the right place. And as I look at the Old Testament and the New Testament both, I see that God had the same plan for serving. And we look at the Old and the New Testament as being so different. But the same God of the Old Testament is the God that I have today. He didn't change. He didn't wake up one day and just decided that He'd had a personality crisis and went from being an angry God to a compassionate God. There wasn't something dramatic that happened to his being. He was as He is, and He always will be who He was. He's always the same, never changing. Now there's things that have changed for our faith. Praise God for that, that Jesus Christ came. But God didn't used to be angry and just all of a sudden became fluffy and happy and bubbly. There wasn't a switch in God. God has always been the same. You see, but if we look at the Old Testament and the New Testament and we begin to bring them together, we can begin to understand the completeness of God. Who He was in the Old Testament is the same, but there were things that He did there and different things that He's done now. And as we merge those together, we can get a full picture of God. And with only a portion of the Bible, either portion or any portion, we can't see the fullness of God. We won't know who He truly was. But as I look back through the Old Testament, knowing that God was always the same as He is today, and I look at different things, I see there were people that had been obedient to God's commands in the Old Testament. They had done what God had asked them to do. And here was God's response to them in Isaiah 29 and 13. He says, "And the Lord said, because this people draw near with their mouth and honor me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me. And their fear of me is a commandment taught by men." I'm going to read that one more time so we can let that sink in a little bit. "Because this people draw near me with their mouth and honor me with their lips." He said they were speaking the right things. They were saying all the right words, but their hearts were far from me. And their fear of me is because of a commandment of man. It wasn't because of a relationship that they had with the Lord and the closeness that they were to Him, but it was because it's something that they were taught. And in that, God was displeased even in their obedience. Are you with me? They did the right thing, but they didn't do it for the right reasons. Their heart wasn't where it needed to be, and so God was displeased. And if you read that story, they were trying to offer Him sacrifices. I'm humored by this. In the Old Testament, they would bring sacrifices to the Lord as an offering, and when their hearts got to the wrong place, they would actually do it almost like they were bringing it as benefit to the Lord. Almost like God would look down and say, thank you for these bulls and goats that I needed them to feed myself. I needed the nourishment from these. And I could imagine God as He would chuckle as He saw their intentions and their heart. Or, He could really look down at them and tell them, and He could probably say the same to us. If you need to feed me, then we're both in trouble. If my God needs me to bring anything to the table, then I'm in a world of hurt. And how we can get in a place where Just like I was sharing this morning, sometimes God brings me to the place where I recognize my insignificance in all of this that happens. But then other times in my life, I begin to look and say, Tyler's done pretty good. This place has grown, and I put in some effort, and I've done this, and I've done that, and because of these things, you see, but when I'm serving with that kind of a heart, God can't use me because my intentions aren't pure. I'm not recognizing that He is my supplier, but I'm looking at myself as supplier. And so in our life, in our serving, we need to remember and place the right things in the right places, and remember that we need to have a heart that longs to be near to Him, and that our motives need to be proper. And so that gets me to a little bit more of Jesus' teaching. Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount, probably his most popular teaching. In two different places in his teaching there, he showed us the same very thing. In Matthew 5:28, Jesus said, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery in his heart." And so he says, you've already committed the physical adultery if you've done the heart, the lust. If your heart is lusted after this, then it's just like doing the physical. In another example, Jesus says, you have heard, this is in verse 21 to 22, it says, you have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not murder, but whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. And so here his example is murder is an action. In anger is our emotion, our heart, our motives. And when our heart is in a place of anger, we might as well have murdered in the eyes of God. I'm not saying if you're mad, you should just go ahead and kill him. But I'm saying in God's eyes, you've sinned just the same. And so Jesus, he was, he's saying, just because we're withholding from these things in action, but we desire them in our heart, we're guilty of those things. And see, Jesus came to transform our lives. The way that we live, the way that we think, the way that we talk, the things that we long for. And so as I look at my relationship with Christ, if I can't see how He has changed me, I ought to wonder how He has saved me, because they go hand in hand. If my life has been saved, it ought to have been changed. And it starts with our heart. He gives us new desires. Slowly, one at a time, He'll begin to take things that pull us away from Him, and we don't like those things anymore. He gives us a desire for Him. Maybe it's for His Word, or to be on our knees in prayer, or to come and serve in a specific way. But God will change us if He saved us. So if we're looking at motives as why we serve and why we do the things that we do, again, remembering we can do the right things for the wrong reasons, we need to look at some common motives that we mess this thing up in. And the world will teach us to do it for so many reasons. Our bodies give us different emotions that we respond to by serving. One is that we have this emotional sympathy for people. We see people and our heart breaks and we're moved. And I'm not saying that's a bad reason. I'm just saying it's not the full reason. We'll get to this in a minute. But if we just do something because we have sympathy on them and serve them because of that, and just kind of wishing that it had never happened or hoping that it never happens to us, that might be the wrong motive. Some others that are more probably better examples is guilt. You ever felt guilty over something that you've done, and so then you try to make up for it by serving to make you feel better? There's an amazing feeling that we get when there's guilt in our life. By serving, it just re-energizes us. That guilt drags us down, and by serving, we can lift ourselves back up. But we're not supposed to serve out of guilt. You see, in this world, things move so quickly. We respond to everything so fast. If I'm at work and Megan wants to get a hold of me, she can text me, and in a second, she's got me. Anything we want, that's how our lives have become. We want everything now, and we move so fast, I think we don't even recognize how often we respond out of guilt. But if we just think on that for a minute, different times that we might be guilty for something that we've done, and so we respond just by serving. rather than by handling it appropriately. Another way that we might have the wrong motives is some people are forced. For example, you may know people that work in a customer call service department, and you call in and you're furious. Anybody ever done that? You call in mad at the world, at the guy on the other end of the phone. If you didn't raise your hand, you're a liar. Repent. And you answer the guy answers the phone, and it's not his fault. It's not even really his problem. He's just the guy that they paid to answer the phone to deal with you, the raging man or woman that's upset about whatever happened with their product. And he begins to follow this protocol. There's things that they lay down. My wife used to work in a call center. She dances at the thought of getting out of that, but they give you a protocol. There's things that you say to respond in the right way, and all you have to do if you work there is follow the protocol, and you'll stay out of trouble. You just do what you're told. And the problem with the protocol is it was written by management that's never been in a call center most of the time, but beyond that, this guy answers the phone, not his problem. You're yelling, screaming, mad at the world because your package didn't arrive on time. And it was just going to ruin your day. You didn't have that new pair of shorts for today that you're going to have to wait and wear them tomorrow. End of the world stuff, I understand. But he continues on following his script. But can you imagine what's running through that guy's mind as he's listening to you? I don't think he's probably on the other end going like this saying, "Praise the Lord." Give myself a heart attack. I don't think he's sitting there saying, "What did I do, Nick?" 2 weeks in a row. We need to fix that. All right. I don't think he's standing there saying, "Well, just praise the Lord. This is all just fantastic. I love this guy, or I love this lady." I can imagine the things running through their mind. And the problem here is his actions are forced. He's forced to serve the person on the other end of the phone because his job depends on it. But his heart isn't doing it for the right reasons, I could imagine. And so there's different places in life that we can be forced to serve people or to act and behave in a specific way, but our heart isn't in it. There's other times that we serve because of pride. We look for opportunities to elevate ourselves and push others down. It's just in our nature. We do that everywhere we go. We can go and serve the public, and I can take care of the homeless because those poor people that just haven't made the right decisions and don't have the resources that I have, and as we begin to push them down, we begin to pick ourselves up, and so we do these servings out of pride. The last way, I think probably the worst way, and unfortunately the most common way that I see, we oftentimes serve in hopes of receiving. You see, this is a tricky one because as Christians, we do this. I love and serve and am obedient to Christ because I want the best hope and joy and future imaginable. And I want the salvation of the Lord. And so I serve Him because of that. It doesn't work that well with people. If you're at work and you serve someone in hopes that you'll get something in return, you're going to be upset when you don't get what you want. You're going to be mad if you don't get what you want. And in that, your serving was in vain. It was of no good. In a marriage, if I do this so that she'll do that, I'm going to leave disappointed if I don't get what I want, and she's going to be upset seeing that I had intentions and motives for whatever I did. You can put it in any relationship, any situation. When we serve with the wrong motives, hoping to receive when we serve, it just doesn't end well. The unity and harmony when we don't serve in the right ways, no matter which one of these ways that we go wrong, it just leads us in the wrong direction. And so, as always, this is our guide. The Scripture is my guide in life. You know that? And so, as always, we can look to Jesus and His life to learn how to do this right. So I want us to flip to John 13. We're going to pick up in verse 3. If you would, John 13, verse 3. this is Jesus teaching, and there's so much to be taught here on serving. Verse 3 says, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And I want us to pause there for a moment and just think about how nasty people's feet are. I don't like feet. Feet to me are nasty. And if we can imagine, I wear socks and shoes most of the time. My kids don't, but we're working on that. But in that time, people would just walk all day, everywhere they went, with sandals on, and just the dirt would be on them. And they didn't have means of bathing like we do. They weren't as hygienic as we are now. And so if you can imagine how nasty feet are now, multiply that by 1,000, and that's about probably be comparable to where we are in the times of Jesus. And so there would be nothing more demeaning than to come up and wash another man's feet. But that's what the Son of God did. As an example, and if we were to think of the most important, powerful, popular person that we could imagine or we could think of in our life, the most powerful man that we know, or powerful woman that we know, and imagine them coming over to our home for dinner. We've invited them over for dinner, or they've invited themselves over for dinner, and they show up and they eat dinner, and as they finish, they leave and they go to the restroom. And you're thinking, I hope my cooking wasn't bad. They've been gone a little while, and a little while later goes on, and a little while later, and finally you go to the bathroom just to realize they're in there scrubbing your toilet, in the floor around the base of the toilet, and under the lid and under the seat of the toilet, and they're just in there cleaning and scrubbing the most dirty place in your house. Maybe you're saying the bathroom's not the dirtiest place, it's my closet. Wherever. Your closet, your bathroom, they're in there cleaning the worst place in your home. That's what Jesus was doing. He was there doing the dirtiest of jobs. He was washing the disciples' feet. He was, in every way, Jesus was beyond them. He was greater than them. He was more powerful. He was closer to the Lord. He was their leader. He was all these things. But in that moment, he humbled himself and stopped and stooped down on his feet and served them in a sign of humility. Picking back up in verse 6, it says, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, and I love Simon, he's a little sarcastic, sometimes a little short, we can relate. And Peter says to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterwards you will understand. And so Peter said pretty much, Lord, you shouldn't be doing this to me. You don't need to be washing my feet. And Jesus says, no, wait a minute, and you'll understand. And so Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. He's bold. Peter just speaks what's on his mind. He said, Lord, you're not in the right place here. You should be washing my feet. So Jesus answers, if I do not wash them, you have no share with me. So I love Simon Peter says to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. He says, if you need to wash my feet, and that's how I'll be close to you, then do the whole thing. Give me a full scrub down here, Lord. He says, that's what I need. And so in verse 10, Jesus says to him, the one who is bathed does not need washed except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew that one was about to betray him, and that's why he said, not all of you are clean. And so just to pause there for another moment, Jesus is down here scrubbing his disciples' feet, knowing that, because he knew all things, knowing that one of them was about to betray him, was about to sell him out for just some silver, that was just going to have his life taken for a small benefit. He knew that as he was serving him. Just think about that for a minute. Somebody that you know is going to wrong you, and Jesus' example is he served them. He humbled himself and stooped down and washed their feet. Verse 12, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed in his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. And if then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example so that you should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who has sent him. You see, Jesus was clearing things up with Peter here just a little bit. Our culture is built kind of in this frame of mind that Peter had. We think that the one who is more powerful, the one who's more wealthy, the one that is more talented, should have less expectations to serve others. That's our mentality. The more power that you have, the less that you need to humble yourself. And on the flip side, the less power and the less talent and the less wealth that you have, the more that you're required to serve others. And so it's the least taking care of the greatest and not the other way around. And that's kind of our mentality in our culture, what we think, and that's what Peter thought as well. But Jesus, his kingdom is flipped upside down. Everything about Christ is backwards from our natural way of thinking. Jesus, he was trying to teach them here that he said, I am the teacher, because he wanted them to recognize that he was above them. But he was humbling himself and lowering himself to a place of service. He was doing it for their good, not for his. He wasn't doing it for the reasons that we do, to build himself up, but he was doing just the opposite. He was doing it to build up those that he was serving. Amen? Amen. Another example in Matthew 20, just a little further back, and you don't need to flip there, but James and John, a couple of his disciples, had been with him, and they're talking to Jesus, and they said, when we get to heaven, I'd like to be on one side and him on the other. Can we arrange that? They were wanting the best seats in heaven. And so Jesus' response was this in 20 and 25. He says, but Jesus said to them, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord over them, and their greatest ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man has come not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so Jesus said, if you want to be first, you need to be last. If you want to be the greatest, you need to be the humblest. You need to be the most serving, the most giving, not the one who's elevated the most. What he's saying is, you guys want these great seats in heaven, but you're not going to get them by asking, how do I get those? You're going to get them by getting on your face and scrubbing your brother and sister's feet, by doing the dirty work that I have for you. Philippians 2:3, Paul says it like this, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. You see, and I mentioned earlier, we just look for opportunities to elevate ourselves in life. That's just normal. We were at Cedar Point, and they had rearranged some of the line, and they had us go. They tightened up one of the chains and had everybody go around a whole other section to wind through, so the line was getting long. Well, as we start, about 20 people pass, and this young man and his girlfriend look, and they see a chain and how they can skip about probably 20 or 30 people in line, or they could follow, and so they elevated themselves in the line. It was just natural. I didn't even, honestly, when I saw it happen, I wasn't a bit surprised. Actually, when I walked by, I was thinking, somebody's going through that. And first I thought, might as well be me. And I figured, no, I better not lead in that way. But it's just natural. We look for opportunities to make things better for us, even at the expense of other people. That's a natural way that we live. And if we don't think that we're ever going to be that way, we need to be reminded we're all sinful. We have that in our nature, but we need to confess our sins because He is faithful and just to forgive us of those things, and He'll cleanse us from that unrighteousness. He'll bring us to a place that we ought to be. He can change our motives and our intentions, I guess is what I'm saying. He can put us in a place where we're serving for the right reasons, where we're doing it the way that He would have us to do. And so if I were to say this is where the rubber hits the road, how do we serve? I would say if you're married, you ought to serve your spouse. You ought to do it in a way that isn't for your gain, but for theirs. And as I say that, my toes cringe. That's hard. I don't like doing that. But that's what the book says. That's how we ought to live our life. You know, if you have children, we need to serve our kids for their benefit. Opportunities that we face, here's ones that I face and I struggle with this. There are so many opportunities that I have with my children to teach them or to choose an easy path. And a quick and easy path always is my first instinct. Kids, clean your room. I could go do it in 3 minutes. Or I could take them up there and show them how to do it and spend an hour. Most of the time 3 minutes sounds better than an hour. But it's my responsibility to serve them and teach them how to do it right. And to do that in that way. Your neighbors, the people that you work with. When we're working, there are people, let's be real for a minute, there's people for most of us that are under us at our workplace that we have some authority over or like to think that we do. There's some that are equals to us. There's some that are higher. For majority of us in this room, that's the case if you're working. And I believe here's the ones we're supposed to serve. All of them. The ones over us even. I know that's not easy. And here's the thing. I know some of you are young and hoping to achieve great things. And it doesn't seem like a path to lead to success. To serve those below you. To humble yourself in your place of employment. But here would be my thought for you. I want you to succeed. But not at the expense of your soul. I want you to do well, but not at the expense of you being obedient to the Lord. He says to humble ourselves and serve those around us. We ought to do that in this life. Galatians 6:10 says, "So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are in the household of faith." And so I believe that we're supposed to serve all people, but especially Bible Community Church, our brothers and sisters right here in Christ, and the church up the road. We ought to be serving one another. All of those who are of faith, we should especially be serving them. You say, why? I believe so the world will look at us and say, what are they doing? In awe and wonder, they will watch us serving one another sacrificially, humbly, in a way that will say, something is different about them. Because the world doesn't do that. People don't give themselves to the point that it hurts because it's of no benefit to me. But when we realize it's what Christ has called us to do, and by example shown us to do, and what we ought to do, then we can do that. And He'll empower us to do that when we get close to Him. See, I believe this is the biggest problem in the church. We expect someone to meet all of our needs. Whether it be here or outside of here, we're always looking for people to meet our needs. And I get people will say, and in different ministries, I've heard people say, man, I wish you guys would do this. Well, sometimes we're doing all that we can do. I'm not going to be able to meet every need that you have. I'm just going to be real up front for a minute. I can't meet all of your needs. I can't do everything you hope that we're going to do. But if God's put that on your heart, maybe He called you to it. And so there's some of you that have pointed out, and justly so, there's some holes in our ministries. We don't have enough people to do all of the things. If God's showing you that hole, maybe He's showing it to you so you'll step in and fill it. And it takes all of us as a body to do what He has for us to do. But, we can serve in so many different ways in the church. He says, especially those who are of faith. Let's serve those people. And so we can do that here. And we've talked about that. I'm not going to go on and on about that again today. But my question for you this morning, I have a couple questions. I think if we just think and pray about these things, where do I refuse to serve, or in what ways do I see myself serving with the wrong motives? I think in areas that we say, I'm not going to do that. That's kind of beneath me. That's usually, we don't say it, but that's usually why we won't do certain things. What are those things? What are things in your life that you don't feel like they're of value, or they're not of significance enough for you to do those things? Or in what ways are you serving, and maybe for the wrong reasons? You know that you're doing it hoping to receive, or you're doing it out of pride, kind of pushing someone else down to lift yourself up. In what ways are you doing that? We need to take that to the Lord. Maybe it's with your spouse or with your church or wherever. What ways are you serving or not serving for the wrong reason? I don't know why this came to mind. My heart's really been heavy about family lately. But if some of you have kids, I just want to clear up real quick. Because I do believe the church is here to serve the members of the church. But at the same time, I will not stand an account for your children. When I come and I stand before the Lord, I will not. You will. And the church is here to equip you and to train you and to encourage you to do the right thing. But let me encourage you, it is so easy to bypass doing the right way with our children. And let me encourage us this morning, let us be good mothers and fathers, even for grown children. There's not a point where we stop parenting, I don't believe. Let us do our part at raising them in the way that Christ would have us to raise them. Amen? I'm going to come to a close. I'll have Sandy come to play. Just to kind of recap where we came from. We're not serving to be saved. Salvation is through the blood of Christ alone. And so if you're here and you're lost and you say, man, I need salvation, I must need to serve more. No, you need to come to Christ and get on your face and say, God, I need you in my life. I'm a sinner in need of a Savior. Save me. That's how we're saved. But for those of us who are believers, we need to look at our life and evaluate, am I serving with the right motives? He wants us to serve in this way, with humility to ourselves and elevation of others. Because when we lift others up, we lift up the name of the Lord. That's His desire. And if I lift Bob up, and Bob lifts up Cindy, and Cindy lifts up me, guess what? The whole church. And we just start going around. If we lift one another up, all of us will be lifted up. But it's not our job to elevate self. It's our job to elevate others. And so we do that by humbling of ourselves. I'm going to have Sandy to play. If God's speaking to you this morning, maybe it's that your motives have been wrong, or you see an area that you need to serve or give in a specific way, I'd encourage you to come. Maybe this morning you might just say, I'm lost and I've been trying to serve my way into heaven and it's not working. And come and meet a Savior who will just save you right where you're at. You don't need to prove yourself to Him. Ask everybody if you would to stand. If God's speaking to your heart this morning, why don't you come?